Hi, and welcome to our interview today. Kate Gregory, nice to see you.
Good to be talking to you.
So let's get started. What you're currently up to? What are you doing?
Right now, I'm doing more talking than I did in the first half of the year, and therefore writing a little less courses. But I'm planning next year already, and thinking about some projects to be doing then.
Okay, so you've been writing courses. What are your courses about?
The most recent course I released on Pluralsight is called Carbon Language First Look, and it's just that, sort of like if you were thinking about evaluating carbon, which is nowhere near ready. And it's not even really ready to evaluate, but it's maybe ready to start evaluating, and that's what the course covers. And before that, I continue to update all my Pluralsight C++ courses. So there's like a fundamentals, which is the whole language, and then there's various subsets. So like what's new in C++ 23, for example.
Well, yeah, 23 is interesting. What gets you excited for C++ 23?
For 23 is kind of a, I don't know, not housekeeping, but there's no necessarily huge things going on. I'm starting to think about getting excited about 26, but a little bit like carbon, it's a ways off yet.
Yeah, 26 is just starting.
Yeah.
And I think everyone is looking forward to reflection, which we seem to get for 26.
I've wanted reflection for a really long time. Interestingly, though, like when I work in languages have it, I do less of it than you think you would. Like you're sure that these things you do that are gross and awful, they loom large in your mind because they're so awful. Like I just want to convert this enum to a string, or I just need to serialize this class, and when I add a member variable for it to just work. But actually, we don't do that very often, so we don't save a whole lot of time with that. I think what's going to be more interesting with reflection is new things that we were not able to do, that we're not complaining about now because they haven't even maybe occurred to us. That's going to be super cool.
I have high hopes for pattern matching that also is driven by similar infrastructure in the language.
Yes, definitely.
And the last big standard we had is C++ 20, and the conference had this year the most popular talk being about modules getting ready and being now available. And so I'm fairly optimistic for C++ 20, but I wonder how long it takes us to implement all those.
Exactly, right? Like modules still really aren't real for most people. They're just not feasible.
Yeah.
And I think that may very well be the case with some of the other like really big things in 26. It's like, well, that's nice, but I don't have that.
Yeah, we have at the conference a couple of talks, and I guess Herb is going to speak about future plans for C++, and we have like a talk on contracts. Contracts is probably a feature which gets a lot of people excited, and I've talked about it with Daniela 2 days ago. And actually, also you have a talk which is a bit different to the other talks, I feel like. You give a talk about the aging programmer. That's like a really interesting topic, and I was actually very curious to see how it did in the voting, and it did actually okay for such a topic. So there's an audience for this.
Good. I like audiences.
And yeah, getting older is something everyone experiences. And so what you're going to
if we're lucky, we get to get older. That's something that I came face to face with. And so, the reality of can I keep working? Can I keep doing the kind of work I want? And there are a lot of reasons why a person might not be able to do the kind of work they want. Like maybe their eyes or their hands won't do the things they want. Like if you're, I don't know, a surgeon, right? Eventually your hands get shaky and you can't be a surgeon anymore. Is that an issue for a programmer? Well, if you can't type, If your risks give out on you, how's that going to be? And there's ways around it. But I think the bigger problem for programmers is other people telling you can't program anymore. So that's, these are the sorts of things that I wanted to look into and ask people about and learn about. And I learned some surprises, and I'm going to share them in the talk.
Yeah, a very personal experience for me was in the last year seeing how Rainer Grimm is doing, and that he, has not only like been diagnosed with a very deadly disease, but also like that he's faring for the diagnosis very well with it, and now actually working again. And he is like barely able to type, and he's using a lot of language tools to translate to text. And so I wonder if that's like, if that's like a possibility for like writing code. And on the other hand, I see that everyone who uses AI for coding is not really happy with it.
I'm not sure we can count on AI, but a very definite pattern is that things that are originally developed for people who have a disability or an illness, they end up benefiting all of us. So there are people who are blind and they're programmers. They can't read the screen, and they probably also don't type in the way that a sighted person would type because they can't, see what letters are coming out where. But they are able to be programmers, and very good ones. And you can see that technology being adapted then to people who can see but have another reason why they can't type, and eventually ending up being useful to all of us. Because one of the things that disability advocates say is that the state of being not disabled is treated as though it's the norm and how we all live our whole lives, but it's actually a temporary state. Most of us will off and on, and then eventually for the rest of our days, have something we can't do. And if the world is set up to accommodate that, then it's a better world.
Yeah, I agree. And especially, I think, in the recent years with COVID, we saw like how many people can really be affected very quickly. One of the last person I talked to at the last year's conference, or after the conference actually, was a fellow programmer who has long COVID and who has recovered, and was like, for 1 year, I couldn't even read text. So.
And if you have long COVID or any other condition, and let's say you can't climb a flight of stairs.
Yeah.
There's nothing in debugging or architecting or remembering parts of the standard library that relies on your ability to go up and down stairs. And yet, in many offices, in many workplaces, if you can't go up and down stairs, you can't work there.
Yeah, I'm kind of sad about all those policies to go back to office, which you mostly hear about in America.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a major benefit from the pandemic has been that working from home has been normalized, and that remote work is more possible than it was before. And I think you've been also working remote for a long time, right?
Decades. Absolutely. There was a time when I would go to clients' offices, but I'd have to really reach back to try to find when I last did. I mean, honestly, I travel to speak at conferences, but that's about it. Everything else we can do remotely. And it's marvelous because you can set your atmosphere up, in a way that works for you. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. You can have the right snacks and drinks on hand. And going into an office and, someone else is controlling the thermostat, or someone thinks it's a great idea that all the meeting rooms are on a different floor than all the offices. You don't notice it until it doesn't work for you. And it's normal then to think that I must be the odd one, that this environment isn't working for me. But of course, everyone for whom the environment doesn't work ends up leaving. So it's a classic survivor bias. You've got a building full of people who think it's great that they're running up and down the stairs all day long. And, if they're 20 and healthy and don't have time to go to the gym, it probably is great. But for someone who, to use your example, has long COVID, has some fatigue, those extra few flights of stairs before and after every meeting, it could be enough to exclude them.
That's true. And I think, especially in many places, the shared offices are so popular, and it speaks volumes that everyone is wearing noise-canceling headphones to work.
So why not be at home? There are some advantages, to being in the same room. Back in the day, we had an office and our staff were there.
Things
but if you're blocking each other out, screening each other out, and talking over Slack or Discord, then why are you there? Skip the commute, be at home.
So it's 42 days, and I'm looking forward to see you again in Berlin. What are you looking forward to do in Berlin and at the conference?
Well, first I'm going to buy some chocolate. I always buy some chocolate when I come to Germany, and I never regret that. So that'll be my jet lag day. I'll go out for a walk. I'll find a store and I'll indulge myself a little bit. But when the conference actually starts, there are so many talks I'm looking forward to seeing. Some of them are talks that I've seen on the schedule elsewhere, but didn't get to. And, I'm interested in that, especially since I know that people update their talks after they give them. It's what I do. So Herb's talk will presumably be updated, and I'll get to see a better version of it than I would have, right? So there's talks like that. And there's people who I haven't seen for quite a few, in some cases years, who I'm looking forward to bumping into for a hallway track for sure.
Yeah, this year the committee is coming, so there will be a lot of folks around, which I have not seen for a long time either.
Yeah, the committee schedule, it can hurt you. Suddenly no one's available to you because they're all busy, or it can help you that way more people are available to you because they're going to be nearby, right?
Yeah, that's the story with the committee. I'm very happy that it aligns very nicely this year. That's a good thing. And I think a very great opportunity for everyone who wants to come to Berlin to actually be able to meet so many folks out of the committee. And of course, also we have other people, I know you're not on the committee, and there's lots of other people which are for a reason not on the committee, which includes me, right?
Exactly. There's lots of ways to contribute to the language and contribute to the industry. And I think that it's good for people to bump into folks who they think of as, oh, you're a committee person, you're not like everyone else, and discover actually they're all kind of like the rest of us. But it's also good to bump into someone who doesn't work on the committee but is nonetheless doing work in this language and making a difference. And that's one of the things I like about conferences, is that it's a mixing function.
Yeah, Nikolai had an interesting, in the interview which I did prior today with Nikolai Josutis, he mentioned that the committee has, of course, become very big, and so not everyone knows what everyone else is doing, and so even committee members don't know the full standard, and there's things and ranges which other people don't know about, and ranges begin is better than STD begin because we couldn't improve that function. That's not possible, but we could improve the other one, the newer one. So it's an interesting thing. And actually, when we talk about committees, I know you're involved with the work on carbon. So yes. Let's talk a bit about that.
Well, you couldn't have a more different governance model, but that's for sure. It's like the spectrum of how you can govern a language. I won't say that Carbon and C++ are at opposite ends of the spectrum, because I think there are languages out there which is just one person who's just doing things. They don't even have anyone helping them. They're just trying stuff. But we're a long way from from a committee situation. And it's done as open source, like not just the code, but the proposals, the spec, if you will. Someone does a pull request, says, in effect, this, not literally, but, oh, we don't seem to have any proposal explaining how lambdas would work in Carbon. Here's one. That's not really it, but close enough. Someone writes up a proposal and says, this is lambdas, or this is generics, or this is variatics, or whatever. And it gets worked on in the same way that any other contribution would get worked on, and at some point it gets approved. And it mostly all just works by consensus. Now, there's a couple places where decisions have to be made, and one of the things we do is if it's bike shedding, if you're arguing about what color the bike shed should be painted, then the painter decides. So whoever's going to implement it will implement it. And if it's bigger than that, if it's not a bike shed situation, and there is no consensus among the overall group, then there are 3 leads who talk it over and make a decision. And at the moment, those 3 leads are Chandler and Richard and myself. And it's working out. We're having a good time. So we're making a language.
Sounds like an interesting project.
Just recently, we actually now have a compiler, a tool chain. So you can compile and link a Carbon code, and there are nightly builds. So you can go to the GitHub and you can get the tools. It's Linux only. So I'm a Windows person. I've mentioned before that on Carbon, I bring lots of diversity to the project. I don't work for Google, and many of the people on the project do. And I don't live in the USA, and many of the people in the project do. But probably the most important diversity that I bring is that I'm a Windows person. And so I'm the one who's going, hey, I've got a line endings problem. When I'm editing files on Windows, I have a different line ending, and the compiler is, oh, okay. Then that moves up the priority list because they didn't have any Windows complaining before. So I use WSL for the actual compiling, but I'm alt tabbing back to Windows for working with files because that's more familiar and comfortable for me. And the tool chain's in a state now that I was able to put out this course that shows people how to do very, very simple things. And I mean simple, like we're a long way into the course before we do any arithmetic, before we do X is less than Y. Like that's a hard thing with the way the language is right now. But yeah, it exists, and you can start to think about whether it's a language you'd like to evaluate.
So X is less than Y is a hard thing in Carbon?
Well, it relies on the prelude, however you want to say it, that brings in like operators for the fundamental types. And some of that's not there yet, so some of that you have to actually paste in. It's a bit of boilerplate. It works. Okay. And with that, you can then write programs that really do something, like what are the prime numbers less than 100, for example. Yeah, it's not rocket science. It's literally not rocket science, but it's something. And you can start to get some comfort, because there are some things in Carbon that if you're a C++ person are going to feel really weird. So for example, there are no constructors. And then people are like, well, but then how do I can't. It's like, it'll be okay. You can have factory functions. And I'm actually coming around to, regardless of the other reasons why there are no constructors, this is actually kind of cool. So for example, if you want to make a point, you would write a constructor that takes an X and a Y and gives you back a point, right? Fine. So you write a factory function, which is a static function, and you can call it make point or something, or just make. That's our convention. And it'll bring you back with the X and Y. But then if you wanted like the idea of a default constructor, right? You don't give it anything and it'll give you back a 0, 0. Well, you don't have to call it by the name of the class because of it not being a constructor. So you could call that static function origin. And that's actually a better name than make that doesn't take any values, right? So suddenly the doors open up like, oh, we could do some really interesting things here. So there are other reasons why not to have constructors, but it turns out to be a very interesting thing to change the way you think about the code you're writing for other people to read later.
Sounds interesting for sure.
Yeah.
So do you have like an example for a talk you're looking forward to in Berlin?
Oh, I do. But hang on a sec while I check my calendar.
I know there.
I went through that. I want to make sure that I credit the right speaker.
What is it? What is it?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So I already saw Jonathan's talk earlier this year, which means that I'm free to go to the Beeman project at that time. And I'm definitely interested in that for sure. And I think that for a lot of people, that's going to be a difficult choice between those two.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm doing more WSL things and more Clang related things when I'm working on Carbon, it's getting me opened up to the idea that I should really try using more of these tools in Visual Studio or instead of Visual Studio. And so there's a talk about Clang Tidy to modernize older code.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'll probably be interested in that. So there's a pile of things where I'd be like, well, I'm not really using those tools, so I'm not going to go to that talk. And now I'm going to be more open to that.
Yeah, the Clang Tidy talk is in the online track.
Yeah.
We'll actually be pre-recording it, and I think on October 21st. That will be
not too long.
If you want to see the talk before the conference, that is an option. We pre-record the online track publicly, so that because for people on site, the online track is not streamed. So some people might go to their hotel room to watch the talk or watch it later. But generally, yeah, there's many interesting talks, and this year it has been really great submissions. And I look forward to some talks, but I know that mostly the talks I will look at are probably then during the conference. As an organizer, you're busy. It's so hard to follow a talk when you're organizing the conference.
Absolutely. So, there's always something that needs to be unlocked or dealt with or fixed up. Yes.
Yeah, and then I have my own talks, my own slides I have to work on and keep updated, and there's lots of things to keep an eye on. And recently, I have to replace a speaker, and so we'll probably have the first speaker doing 2 talks now, because we actually have 2 speakers who had very highly rated talks twice. So I want to give another talk to them. And I already have like a handful of people replacing.
It's the new reality. I don't remember 5 years ago speakers needing to be replaced felt very unusual, and now it seems like every conference I go to, there's 1, 2, 3 speakers who, for a variety of reasons, like they might be sick or some. One year in Toronto, there was an airline strike, and the speaker was coming from Europe and just couldn't. Like, we moved it to the last day, but it just couldn't happen. Yeah. When I was just recently in Norway at NDC Tech Town, and like 2 days before, they said, "Can you do a second talk?" It happened. So I was quite happy to dig out a greatest hit and do it again. But,
yeah, it's, as an organizer, you know your people, which have like giving 2 talks or a different talk at CPPCon, and there's like 1 or 2 speakers which I do have at the conference for that reason. And last year was extreme. Last year we had 6 or 7 speakers.
That's a lot.
And needed to replace that. I was kind of working out. But anyways, you mentioned Tech Town. How did you like your trip to Norway?
I'm always happy. I'm always happy to come to Europe, actually. I enjoyed the trains. People who live with the trains, they're like, oh, our trains are so awful. I'm like, you do not know what awful is like. You need to come and see my trains, and then you will understand why I like your trains so much. They come on time. They take this amount of time they're supposed to take. Maybe they're 10 minutes late on an hour and a half journey. That's nothing. And the frequency, I don't even have to really plan. I just say, well, I'll get to the airport and then however long it takes to get my bag and whatever, and then I'll go and there'll be a train, and I know there'll be a train every, let's say, hour. Well, if we were holding a conference an hour or two away from the Toronto airport, like say in Waterloo or something, I think there's one train a day. And it doesn't go to Waterloo, it goes to Kitchener, and then you'll have to figure out how to get to Waterloo from there, right? Which is why we're not holding a conference in Waterloo.
I had no idea. I thought Canadian trains are kind of fine. And I know that there's like
so we have
famous train, which I want to ride on.
We have a train from the airport down to downtown Toronto. And that's fine. That was done for like the Pan Am Games or something. And that's, so we hold a CPP North right downtown, and it's really well looked after. So speakers who are flying in can come on the train from the airport. People who are local can come on the subway and other kinds of public transit. I go there by commuter train. There's a regular train that people take to go into the office from their suburban homes, and that's how I go back and forth to that conference. It's my easiest travel of them all. But yeah, when I go to Europe, because of the population density, there are subways, there are streetcars, there are trams. It's very easy to get from A to B, and it's not even just that. It's like there's a store where I can walk out from the conference hotel. I won't have to walk more than 5 or 10 minutes if I want to buy something. If you've been to CPPCon, that's not the experience there.
Yeah, it was in the old location in Bellevue.
In Bellevue.
I remember those years fondly, but the new location I have been to once, and since then not. And I figured out that there actually now is a supermarket which is like 4 kilometers away, and that makes me excited because I get to walk 4 kilometers and I can walk back. But I'm used to walking, and
right. It's very hard to choose locations. I've been through it. You've been through it. You can't. There's no perfect location. Someone's going to have a problem with whatever you choose. For me, I really prioritize. I'm not sure why that's continuing to ring. Sorry. There we go. Safety first and foremost, so that speakers and attendees all feel comfortable in and around the venue throughout the program hours, and the convenience then after that of how easy and cheap it is to get back and forth, and I like the idea of being kind of integrated into the place that you are, of getting to see some things. Back in the first few years of this century, I went to a lot of conferences all over the USA, and I can't really tell you what those places are like, because I saw the airport and I saw the convention center and I saw a hotel, and that's all. I didn't go to any sightseeing or tourist attractions or just walk around and shop, with very, very few exceptions. I did put my foot down in New Orleans, and I took an afternoon and saw New Orleans a little bit.
Yeah, I think for conferences you have to stay a bit longer if you can, but often that is just like business travel.
Right. And the conference feels like they should pack the days. I certainly have seen this. Well, we can start at 9 and go to 5, but we could come in at 8. We could have extra lightning talks from 8 till 9, and we could do something in the evenings, and not everyone has places to go or whatever. Why don't we have a board game night, or and these are wonderful, but they result in you devoting your entire time in the city to the conference and not to anything else.
Yeah, this year we have 4 keynotes, and 1 keynote is in the evening, because I thought Herb is flying over for the committee meeting and he's visiting the conference. Yes, a keynote makes sense, but I'd like to, the keynote slots we have are not very friendly to people coming directly from the West Coast.
Yes,
So I
it's
thought,
a big change.
let's utilize the one evening where we could have him keynote. That is a bit more friendly to his time zone, and I hope this works out.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that especially for people who don't want to sightsee, they value the fact that the days are really long. They're getting the most value out of their time away from working. And I can see that. You know, as a boss, I wouldn't send someone to a conference who's like, oh, we have sessions from 9 till 12, and then we want you to explore Hawaii. You know, like, I'm not paying for that.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting concept, to only book half the day in the venue and then.
Many years ago, I did a conference on a cruise, and we had sessions on the sea days. So there are days when the boat is on the water and there's nothing to see. It's just ocean. And on those days we had the conference. And then it would get to where it was going, and we didn't have any sessions, and we went off and like explored the Bahamas or whatever. And then we'd get back on the boat and it would go somewhere else, and we'd have sessions, and then we'd get off and we'd like have a beach day. It was fantastic. And the weird thing about cruises is they can be very inexpensive compared to hotels in big expensive conference towns. So the hotel cost for going to a 3-day conference would have been more than the cruise cost of going on this 6-day cruise that had 3 days of conference in it. But you got a cruise out of it.
That gives me ideas.
Yeah. Listen, if you want to run another one, I'm in. Just call me.
I actually, within this year, saw like this one company who is like, you know, hey, we have a cruise ship and we run conferences on that, and here's and yeah, now you make me wonder if I should, you know, move meeting C++ on a cruise ship
onto the water
from Hamburg to New York.
Well, you wouldn't have, you know, you'd have a lot of sea days if you're crossing the Atlantic. The nice thing about bopping around the Caribbean was, you know, you could have a sea day and a shore day. But, you know, like I see a lot of ads for these river cruises up the Rhine, you know, that would appeal. Yeah.
Maybe one day. We'll see.
Maybe. I mean, to come back to the topic of the aging programmer, it's another one of the things that changes in your life. The kind of vacation you do in your 20 is probably not the kind of vacation that appeals to you in your 60s and 70s. And generally speaking, the people in their 60s and 70s have more money too.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not in the 60s yet, but I found it very interesting when I got back to Malta, where I, you know, for the first time, I think it was 17, I went to Malta on an exchange to learn English. And I was there in my 20s, and then I was there in my 30s, and I saw like how the place evolved and aged. And the last visit was very different. It was like kind of, it got more touristy, and you kind of could see like the influence from certain areas. And on the other hand, it still was like when you know the nice places in Malta, you could get around and have a nice holiday.
You know, I went to Venice, and parts of Venice they're super crowded, but also the stores are like, you know, selling souvenirs, selling glass that was probably actually shipped in from China or something. And then you go like 2 or 3 blocks, and suddenly it's completely different. You know, it's not crowded. It's much more, I don't know, authentic or real. It's not putting on a show. So it's a case of knowing where to go, right? If you have been to a place before and you remember a place, you can go there.
That's true. Anyways, I think it was nice to talk to you, Kate, and I'm looking forward to see you.
I'm looking forward to seeing you. Not that long now.
Yeah, it's very close. So join us in Berlin or online. I think
see you there.
is one of the few, or maybe the only hybrid conference still. So
yeah.